axis of evil, axis of evil, axis of evil.
A Cuban guerrilla force prepares for invasion. They've been doing this every Sunday morning for the past 40 years.
It's a bit close then.
Alpha 66 is a militia that aims to overthrow Cuban President Fidel Castro. Today is Thanksgiving, so only the elite force is training. Alpha 66 is based in Florida and uses weapons bought freely in America.
And that could have been Castro.
Could have been.
That's what we call full metal jacket. So this is full metal jacket round. I've been questioned before and I still have the same answer. There's no dialogue with that man. He lies too much to everybody, including his own people. So the only answer for that is just one bullet, and that'll be with his name on it.
We take a break from the bullets for Thanksgiving lunch. I wasn't sure what we were toasting.
Then you go forward. Lance yourself forward when you're ready. So that will eliminate the track. Did I hit it? Just tell me I hit it, even if I didn't. Okay. Very good. You did it. All right.
Alpha 66 claims to be totally prepared for a full-scale invasion of Cuba. They've already launched at least 70 commando attacks, mostly hit and run, with small boats on Cuba's coast.
There was three individuals that were wounded. There was, I think, 2 fatalities. And the last mission we did.
But doesn't that allow Castro to call you terrorists instead of freedom fighters? No?
We're not terrorists. We're liberators.
Yeah, but that's not what Castro would say.
That's probably would say, but we're liberators.
Yeah. I think that's the last thing you should worry about in here. One of the main charges against Cuba that puts it on the axis of evil list is the fact that it harbours terrorists. And we've just been to a group who are openly training for an invasion of another country, of Cuba, with machine guns and pump-action shotguns. And as they told us 5 or 6 times, there's nothing illegal about what they're doing whatsoever.
Castro has many different enemies here. His daughter is a well-known fixture of the Miami dissident scene and probably hurts Castro more than Alpha 66.
Elena? Hi.
Sorry.
How you doing? We went to see the group Alpha 66. You know them?
Yeah.
And they're training for an invasion.
Yes.
I mean, whether or not they're actually going to do it, I don't know.
They are like 90 years old.
Elena fled Cuba in 1996, disguised as a Spanish tourist. She then wrote a book about her bizarre childhood. She's the product of an affair between Castro and a beautiful Cuban model.
I don't know what's on here. I know that I'll get a great allergy from this. No doubt about it. I think it's mostly my mother's stuff.
So if your mother and Fidel stayed loyal to the revolution, how come you left?
I never liked the revolution, you know. You have your feelings, you feel uncomfortable, and you didn't like what's happening to you.
But what was happening that you didn't feel comfortable about?
Well, I didn't like to be in a uniform, in a gray uniform all my life, screaming anthems and marching like a soldier, like becoming a Chinese, you know. And you begin to question your father, you begin to question your mother, and you begin to become a pain in the ass, actually.
So did Fidel ever have anything to say to you about not supporting the revolution?
Could you discuss it openly with him?
Yes, I could, but then you know that there is no way to discuss anything openly with him. I mean, you will receive an answer and that's it.
How does it feel for you? Because like most of the world has a romantic idea of Castro and Che Guevara and the revolution.
Yeah, but you know, it's been 15 years. You have to look through what's after that legend, you know. There are people sick and exhausted already. And being a legend doesn't fit you. I think that one of the secrets is that he deeply despised the Cuban people because he had done nothing but ruin the country and use them. So what surprised us, for instance, is that Bush will go in as far as Iraq to fight terrorism, and he has somebody 90 miles away.
I was quite surprised to see Cuba on the list.
No, they've been, as I told you, they've been exporting the revolution. They've been training every guerrilla in the world. Terrorists, they're all, they have, they're a network. It's like a mafia.
Yeah. Do you get bored talking about Fidel?
Yeah, I have to convince people about things that I'm convinced, and I won't convince anybody. So,
I don't think you have a job convincing people here.
I'm not convincing you, for instances.
Alina hosts a late-night talk show in Miami. Tonight, especially for us, she's decided to talk about whether or not Castro deserves to be on the Axis of Evil list.
Bueno, vamos a empezar a abrir los micrófonos en honor de estos muchachones y muchachonas que están aquí desde hace 2 horas. ¿Por qué Cuba es considerada terrorista dentro de los 6 países que el State Department considera terroristas? WQA está en el aire.
Buenas noches. Oiga, si Cuba es un bastión de terrorismo, narcotráfico, guerra de guerrilla, armas bacteriológicas, insurrección, etcétera, etcétera, a nivel mundial. Los muertos que ha ocasionado el tirano Castro Weyland a nivel mundial merece que se le dé sin discusión el premio Nobel del terrorismo a él y a su pandilla comunista.
WQA, buenas noches, está en el aire.
Están luchando contra los terroristas sionistas y los americanos. Y para mí sí representa una amenaza terrorista, porque puede albergar y dentro de Cuba pueden planear y preparar atentados contra Estados Unidos y contra países que puedan ser aliados.
Bueno, y también está lo del tema de las armas biológicas.
Había lugares prohibidos que no se podían pasar, ni se mostraban, no, lugares prohibidos cerrados, ni preguntar qué había ahí. Y por ahí no dudo que estén fabricando cualquier producto químico ahí que sea para bacteriológicamente dañino.
What was the result of the phone poll? How many people thought he was a
No,
terrorist?
everybody says he's a terrorist.
Everybody.
Forget it.
But outside of Miami, I've never heard much evidence to suggest that Cuba is one of the 6 most threatening countries on Earth. It seemed to have more to do with the long and testy relationship between Cuba and America.
Well, unfortunately, because of strained US-Cuba relations, I can't travel directly from the States to Cuba. I can't get the visa, so I've had to come via the Bahamas. But I've only got 3 hours here, and I am using my time productively, continuing to read like a maniac.
I arrived in Cuba with a head full of romantic stories about Fidel and Che's incredible adventures. But they happened over 40 years ago, and I had mixed expectations about what I would find there now. In a square full of bookstores, the ideas of revolution and socialism were still everywhere.
Capital. That's capital in Spanish. Thomas Mann, Winston Churchill.
I wondered how much excitement Cubans could still feel if they'd had nothing else to read about for 40 years.
Only $5.
Look at that, it's $5.
What is it?
His first ever speech in Cuba, 1953.
Yes.
This is famous.
Very famous,
Famous,
in
yeah.
Cuba.
History will absolve me.
Very famous.
The Museum of the Revolution, formerly the palace of Fulgencio Batista, the American-backed dictator who was ousted by Fidel's revolutionary forces.
So this building, it was decorated by Tiffany's Studios of New York, Tiffany's, in the 20s, right?
We're led through the grandeur and into a secret room behind a mirror.
This is the presidential offices. We have the original furnitures of 1940 when Batista was president for the first time, right? But Fidel also uses 5965.
Right.
So this is an
It
instrument.
looks a little bit bourgeois, Fidel.
No, but they are Batista furniture.
Okay. They were stolen, so it's okay.
Yeah. This is Batista, in here, in this office.
Yeah.
He was in a legal position as a president, but in 1952, Batista led the coup d'etat, the military coup. So he became a dictator, right?
Yeah.
And he was in power until 1959. Why? Because in 1953, Fidel started the National Liberation War that you will see upstairs. Under seaward, in Guantanamo City, were found human remains.
Under the sewers.
And in here we have some of the instruments that they did torture. So in the summer of 1958, Fidel controlled the center part of Cuba and all the east.
And he's getting more and more men because he has such popular support.
Yeah. Batista had 45,000 men. And Fidel finished 1959 with just 3,000 men.
But most of the population of Cuba supported Fidel.
Everybody.
Yeah.
Everybody supports Fidel.
But people still seem very proud of this, the revolution.
That's history. That's the past.
Yeah.
We are in present days. No?
And today is a new battle, a different battle.
Persistent rumours of his death mean that Castro has to make regular public appearances. He's outlasted 9 US presidents and pissed most of them off. Maybe that's why he's on the evil list. There's a joke that's been going around among exiled Cubans in particular, that someone presented Fidel with a Galapagos turtle as a present, and he said, "Oh, it's gorgeous. How long does it live?" And they said 400 years. And he said, "Oh, that's the trouble with pets. You fall in love with them, and then they die on you."
Alguien interminable estamos descubriendo.
We toured the 16th century Spanish fort that sits on Havana's waterfront, where in 1960 Che Guevara had 55 senior collaborators of Batista's government executed. The bullet holes are still here, but no one would show us. We were distracted from our search by the local lighthouse keeper.
Do you talk to Americans on the radio?
Yeah, it's very near, only 90 miles.
And you talk?
But only if there is some emergency, some problem only.
Oh.
Because of no relation, no trade, nothing.
But many Americans are here, tourists.
Yeah.
Many.
Yeah, a lot of come. And sometimes they come to Cuba in a sailing boat. You can hear, for example, this is Miami, the weather station. Yeah.
It's the enemy.
No, the enemy sometimes, but we can talk. We use the national flag of the different countries. This is the Union Jack.
Oh, yeah.
So when a British vessel comes, we hoist the flag outside in the mast in order to welcome. This one, never used it.
Never used it?
Never, no American vessel because of the embargo. But maybe soon.
Yeah?
Maybe. Here. Look at my friend. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, you watched the beautiful girl?
This is the hot corner.
The hot corner?
Only for you.
I've seen better than that.
I won't look.
You get paid for this all day long?
Yeah. We were here 24 hours.
Yeah.
12 hours to wash every scene and 12 to do the scene.
Some streets in Havana have been beautifully restored, especially those close to Hemingway's old haunts. But it's difficult to have a genuine Cuban experience when a Cuban is genuinely begging for dollars just outside. At night it's worse. Cubans don't have the dollars to spend in the bars. Sometimes they are not even allowed in. They wait around outside, looking for a chance to hustle or beg. Cuba has one of the lowest crime rates in Latin America, but the police are everywhere. Crimes against Cuba's precious tourists cannot be risked. I've just run the gauntlet that is the long road outside our hotel, and you get stopped literally every 10 feet. People ask you for anything and offer you anything, offer you cigars and then more. And some people, once you've told them you don't want to buy whatever they're offering, and once you've told them that you've run out of dollars, some people even ask for trousers or a t-shirt. Two old men even asked if they could have the soap and toothpaste from my hotel bathroom. I was finding Havana depressing, with Cubans prostituting themselves on almost every corner of the tourist district. It felt like a softer, tackier version of the mafia's Havana from the 40s and 50s, when Cuba was a playground for America's rich and corrupt.
And they left early to the sound of Che Guevara turning in his grave.
I could just be tired. Last night was only 2 or 3 hours sleep, so hopefully tomorrow we'll get out of this tourist area and see something more. Hopefully there's more to Cuba than this. But first impressions are that there's no battle over Cuba. There's no fight between capitalism and socialism or America and Cuba. The dollar's won. I wanted to get away from the tourists and see if there was still a real Cuba to see. America has accused Cuba of supporting and harbouring terrorists, but America's terrorists are heroes in most of the axis of evil countries, none more so than Che Guevara. This is Santa Clara, which is the scene of the last battle before Batista fled and Castro entered Havana. These are 4 of the train carriages that Batista sent to Santiago de Cuba to defeat Fidel. But Che and just 17 men, 18 men in total, were waiting for him. They ambushed them and defeated them, even though there were 408 heavily armed soldiers in here. The only other tourists here are a busload of retired Cuban lawyers. It makes you feel proud? Eh? It makes you feel proud?
Yeah.
Yeah?
For most people of their generation, the revolution gave them access to education, healthcare, and a salary. America acknowledges the fact that Cuba leads the world in the production of vaccines and pharmaceuticals. The problem is, Cuba sells these products to rogue states like Iran. who could turn them into biological weapons. Next, the Bay of Pigs, the scene of the first defeat of Yankee imperialism in Latin America. This embarrassing fiasco failed because it was rushed. It was rushed because the US knew that in the early 60s, Castro's huge popularity was growing by the day. That they were prepared to overthrow such a popular leader was not questioned. That night, we stay with a Cuban family close to the beach. When Castro legalized use of the dollar in 1994, Cubans across the country opened their homes to tourists. For about $25 a night, you get a bed, a meal, and all the political debate you could want.
America has a very unfair attitude. It's unfair against Cuba, all the other Central American countries, against Iraq, against Afghanistan, against all other countries, because America believes that it is the strongest country in the world, but it is not. The fact is that on the 17th to the 18th of April 1961, they attacked us here. They landed here at the Bay of Pigs and they were beaten back. Then they went to Vietnam. They attacked the Vietnamese people. They were beaten. Bush talks about Cuba and he doesn't even know why he's talking about Cuba. I really hope that one day there will be a president of the United States who can read and write. It's really unfortunate that Bush is such an idiot.
¿Cómo es cóctel para
la cena?
Para la cena, para ya lista.
En servicio la recepción del Vicente. Por el líbero, Michael que acomoda el ataque de Vidal. Doble bloqueo. 25-20 centrales contra la pared.
Castro also stands accused of denouncing America's war on terror, despite the fact that he signed every UN resolution against terrorism since September the 11th, and offered to return any escapees from Guantanamo Bay.
Tuvieron este martes su jornada más intensa, con inspecciones a 5 sitios considerados por Washington.
The following morning, our host agrees to accompany us to the Bay of Pigs, to the place where he and his friends fought 1,500 American-backed invaders. Sebastián was 26 at the time.
This line here was the line of fire. This is where they took us by surprise around midnight. This is where they took us by surprise. They came through over here, and over there they killed 2 of my mates.
Adelante mataron dos compañeros.
We were in this position, and we were shooting in the direction of the sea. Every time someone came towards the shore, we would shoot.
Sebastián believes American imperialism is ultimately doomed.
Imperialism is losing ground, if not just now. I may not see it happen because I am too old, but you young people will see it in your time. Imperialism is losing ground. American imperialism is losing ground.
But nearby, in a small town called Australia, there are signs that the old revolutionary Cuba is doomed too. Australia was built around a sugar mill, which has just closed. Before the revolution, over half of Cuba's sugar industry was owned and run by Americans.
This would have been one of the ones that Castro nationalized after the revolution. He nationalized $1 billion worth of American companies.
The nationalization of Cuban industry was one of Castro's first moves after the revolution. It caused fury in the US State Department.
So actually I think this is probably one of Fidel's great crimes, is that he dared to suggest that if you're using Cuban natural resources and Cuban labour, then the Cuban people should get the benefits. It was called the rotten apple theory, and the fear was that that idea, that bad example, would spread throughout Latin America.
The US refused to trade with Castro's Cuba, so the Russians stepped in. This relationship formed the backbone of the Cuban economy for nearly 3 decades.
The Russians used to buy their sugar at the same price every year, no matter what. So what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed?
The sugar was often sold at a very low price because of external conditions on the market. We had to lower our price.
Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the first half of the 1990s was very tough for Cuba. Things have greatly improved since then, but not enough, and not without compromise.
Which do you prefer, the tourism or the sugar as the main industry?
It is difficult after a tradition of 100 years in the sugar industry, where the majority of the locals dedicated themselves to working in the sugar mills, to dedicate themselves to tourism. Even though the sugar industry is not doing as well because of factors in the world market, our men prefer to work in the sugar industry, which is really nice. They're very prepared to take on any task. Come and look at the locals here. They're studying to better themselves.
In a building on the premises, the state is providing former sugar mill workers with further education so they can learn a new trade. Castro has said that the goal of the revolution is no longer to spread socialism, but to save its conquests. I wondered how much compromise the revolution could take.
There's a farm of crocodiles, which is an idea of the revolution, yeah?
Yeah. What does that mean?
An idea of the revolution.
We had stumbled across a revolutionary tourist attraction. Politics is everywhere in Cuba, especially when it's good for revolutionary fortitude. Our guide explains the difference between American and Cuban crocodiles.
This is the Cuban crocodile. These are animals that die fighting each other.
So which is the better crocodile?
The Cuban. This one has tougher skin, that is to say, more resistant. In its natural way of life, it's stronger. And not just because it's Cuban, not just because I'm Cuban.
Y no porque sea cubano. No porque sea cubano ni porque yo sea cubano.
It's an idea of the revolution.
Que es una idea de la revolución de Fidel.
Of Fidel Castro. Fidel paid a visit here in 1960.
Oh, right in the eye. We drove past there last night and we couldn't work out how you get the word revolution in a sign for a crocodile farm, but Fidel was very worried that the crocodiles were becoming an endangered species, so it was his idea to start this farm.
I have to say that one looks pretty endangered.
Young people in Cuba aren't so excited about what the revolution has delivered for them. American music, cars and clothes mean much more to them than socialism. The axis of evil doesn't come up in conversation here. Neither does the revolution. Jesus, my guide for the night, worked at the sugar mill until it closed. Now he's retraining so he can drive the trains for the tourists. Whatever Castro can be said to have achieved for Cuba, he won't have the dedication of the young, while they are expected to struggle by on a meagre monthly salary.
Fidel has proudly said that even during Cuba's toughest period following the collapse of the Soviet Union,
not a single school shut down, and 30,000 new doctors were put out into the world. But that means nothing to young Cubans who have got a pretty bleak set of options when you think about it. They can go to the fantastic education system and become doctors and work in the fantastic health system, but they're going to be really struggling to survive on $30 or $40 a month. If they want a lifestyle where buying a new pair of shoes or a bottle of cooking oil or shampoo isn't a problem, then they've got to go and work as hotel porters or barmen or taxi drivers, anywhere where they've got access to tourists and their dollars. Jesus, whom we met in the town of Australia, accompanies us to the northern shores of Cuba. It's the home of Elian Gonzalez, the little boy who created havoc with US-Cuban relations 3 years ago, when he floated onto American shores in a rubber tire. His mother was drowned in their attempted escape. So this is the town of Cardenas, where Elian Gonzalez and his father live. So we think there's a pink building. Yeah, we think this is Elian's school. Fidel has built a museum about 4 buildings down the road for Elian. That's a bit strange, going to school when you're 9 years old and having a museum dedicated to you next door but 3. As tourists, we couldn't request an interview with Elian, so we went to his museum instead. After a long fight between Cuba, America and the Cubans in Miami, Elian was allowed to return to his home here in Cardenas, where his father still lives. A picture of his name with a ball and chain around the ankle of the N, and the ball is the Mickey Mouse. That's a good one. Apart from the exploitation of differences between first and third world economies, there was no mention of what drives Cubans to risk their lives by trying to cross the 90 miles to America any way they can. Cubans believe that just off the coast, north of Cardenas, there is a current that will pick them up and take them all the way to America. Did you ever hear anything about what life is like for Cubans once they reach America?
They say over there you work. You have to work a lot, but the pay is plenty. I have a friend who went a year and a bit ago. He left for Miami. After 6 months of being in Miami, he came back here to Cuba to see the family, to see his mother and his child. And he came with plenty of money and plenty of things. What we earn in a month, they earn in a day in Miami. That comrade there, he can't explain things very well because he's in his workplace, and it could cause a problem. It could get him into trouble. No, because I don't work here. I don't work for the state.
It's a state-run restaurant, and so this guy can't say anything, and I would have thought a bunch of foreigners with a camera asking questions is probably not too clever. Yeah, I think we should turn off. Out of all the Axis of Evil countries, I enjoyed the most freedom in Cuba. The same cannot be said for Cuba. It must go against revolutionary ideals that Cubans aren't allowed across the police-controlled bridge that separates the town of Cardenas from the tourist haven of Varadero. So Jesus couldn't come with us. Inside, we see police pulling over vehicles with Cuban drivers. That's good, they're checking his papers.
Yeah.
So this is Varadero, where there are about 15 five-star hotel resorts where I think the idea is you never leave. The only Cubans that are allowed in these resorts are the ones who work there. So when you come on these holidays, the only Cubans you're likely to meet are the ones serving you drinks and changing your bed sheets. Eliane's father works here, and we pass workers looking for a lift home. There are vague glimpses of a Cuba gone by, and the Cuba that is to come. We think that one says, the revolution is construction. Varadero, which hasn't quite got the same ring to it as socialism or death. The Cuban government aspires to increase the number of tourists from 2 million a year to 6 million. It is already the country's biggest source of income. The US accuses Castro of continuing to view terror as a legitimate tactic to further revolutionary objectives. Nostalgia aside, I found it hard to believe Castro still had any revolutionary objectives.
The food is not so nice, but all the sport opportunities are so very nice.
And what about the Cubans? You like the Cubans?
I don't know. I didn't meet anyone. No.
We head back to Havana, ready to fly home. On the way, we finally see evidence of Cuba's military threat towards America.
¿Quién lo usó? ¿Cuándo? No, eso no lo usó nadie, eso estaba ahí, se lo pusieron ahí de adorno. ¿Nunca nadie lo usó? No. No, nunca. ¿Pero se puede usar todavía? No, ya.
Russian?
¿Es ruso?
Ruso, sí.
That probably sums up Cuba's threat to America, actually. A rusty old missile dumped in a cowfield because it no longer worked. In truth, as a tourist, I had no way of knowing what threat Cuba, or any of the axis of evil countries, posed to anyone. They are all ruled by unelected and violent regimes, but they don't need George W. Bush to tell them that, especially when so many other unelected and violent regimes escape scot-free.